The land was white and endless, save for the smudge of trees near the creek and the lone figure trudging the perimeter. Samuel Alder, bent not with age but with something harder to carry. His boots broke the crust of the snow with quiet finality. Each step seemed less about checking the fence and more about marking time, as if routine were the only thread holding him upright. He moved slow, deliberate. The kind of man who didn't waste motion or words. His face had the look of someone who had seen too many good things vanish and learned to stop reaching for more. His beard had gone gray at the chin, though he was not yet old. The wind tugged at his coat, a patched canvas thing that didn't quite hold out the cold anymore. Behind him, the house sat with its shoulders hunched, a structure worn by grief. The chimney breathed thin smoke. Inside, a little girl named Rosie sat curled in a rocking chair too big for her, cradling a rag-stuffed cloth rabbit. Her cheeks were pale but clean, her hair braided loose. She watched the door, not with worry but with a silent expectancy of a child who had already learned to be patient with sorrow. Samuel returned just before dark, shook the snow off his coat, and stepped inside without a word. He set his rifle by the door, habit, not threat, and nodded to Rosie. She gave him a small smile, and he tried to return it. It came out crooked, more muscle than warmth. He lit a lamp, stirred the coals, added a log. The house creaked around them like it, too, remembered who was missing. Her absence clung to everything, the worn apron still hanging by the pantry door, the scent of lavender still caught in the quilt, the silence where her voice used to hum. Miriam had been gentle. And then she was gone, blood soaking the bedsheets after Rosie's birth, her hand slipping from his as the midwife whispered a prayer. 2 winters had passed since. Now, the days bled into one another, marked only by weather and chores. He spoke little, but he never raised his voice. That was his grief's shape, not anger, but retreat. He did the work of 2, with a kind of quiet desperation. Rosie, bright-eyed and brave, filled the gaps the best she could. She fed the chickens. She swept the corners. She spoke to her cloth rabbit like it might carry words to heaven. That night, supper was thin stew and cornbread, eaten in silence save for the clink of spoons. Samuel watched the window, though there was nothing to see. Just white. Just dark. Just wind. When Rosie had been put to bed and the fire banked low, Samuel sat at the small desk tucked beneath the front window. He opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a folded letter, creased, yellowed, never sent. Dear Miss, my name is Samuel Alder. I am a widower with 1 daughter. I live near Bristle Creek, 2 miles from town. I seek not a servant nor a saint. Just someone kind. Someone who don't mind quiet. He had written it in the thick of grief, one night when the silence had screamed too loud. But he never mailed it. Who would want to come here, to this life? He held the letter now, read it over again, then slid it back into the drawer without sigh or sentiment. Outside, the wind howled like something wounded. It was well past midnight when the dog barked, a short, surprised sound from the barn. Samuel sat up in bed, heart thudding, then swung his legs over the side. The floor was cold. He pulled on boots, shrugged into his coat, and took the lantern down from its hook. The barn sat a short walk from the house, just past the old cottonwoods. He moved quickly, lantern casting long shadows on the snow. The dog, Mosby, half-deaf but still alert, whined low and circled the door. Samuel eased it open, and the warm smell of hay and old wood greeted him. The lantern's light swept across familiar shapes, tack on hooks, feed sack stacked, the mare dozing in her stall. And there, nestled in the farthest corner, a shape that didn't belong. A woman. Sleeping or near enough, curled tight beneath an old wool blanket he didn't recognize. Mosby was lying beside her, tail twitching. She stirred as the light reached her face, not startled, but slow, as though surfacing from a deep dream. Her eyes blinked open. They were not frightened, just tired, the kind of tired that lived in the bones. "I'll go," she whispered before he could speak. Her voice was hoarse from cold or silence. Samuel stepped forward slowly, lowering the lantern. "You know this is my barn?" he asked. She nodded. "I didn't mean to trespass," she said. "Just needed out of the wind." Her coat was too thin for the weather. Gloves frayed. Snow still clung to her boots. There was a valise near her feet, worn leather tied shut with a belt. He noticed the way she sat up, proud even now, not begging, just explaining. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Florence May." "You from town?" "No," her hands folded in her lap. "Came on the train. Got off 2 days ago. Been walking since." "Where were you headed?" She looked up at him then, and something passed between them, not recognition, but alignment. Two people who had lived through hard things without asking anyone to fix them. "I was looking for Samuel Alder," she said. He stared. The lantern flickered in his hand. For a moment he thought the wind had tricked his ears. "You found him," he said. She nodded again, slowly, as though that made sense to her. "I had a letter," she murmured. "From him. From you. Said you needed someone kind." Samuel felt something tighten in his chest. "I never sent it." She smiled, faint and crooked. "Maybe the Lord did." The words hung in the air. He didn't know what to say to them. She looked away, brushing straw from her skirt. "I'll move on at first light. Just needed a place warm enough to keep breathing." He watched her. How still she was, like someone used to being told no. Like someone who would not fight it if it came again. "No call to sleep out here," he said finally. "Come inside. There's stew and a fire." She glanced at him, startled for the first time. "I don't want to trouble you." "You're already here," he said, more gently than it sounded. "May as well come in out the cold." She nodded slowly, rose without complaint, gathered her bag and blanket. Mosby stood too, loyal to whoever needed warmth. They walked back through the snow in silence. The house was dark but for the embers glowing faint behind the hearth grate. He gave her his chair by the fire, poured her a bowl of stew and set it on the table without comment. She ate slow, grateful. Not ravenous, but steady, like someone used to making food last. When she finished, he showed her to the spare room, the one with the rocking horse his brother had made for Rosie. He hesitated in the doorway, unsure if he should explain that it was his wife's room once, or if that mattered. Florence set her bag down, ran a hand along the quilt. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded. That night, as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the wind died down. The silence was still deep, but not hollow. Somewhere down the hall, another soul was breathing, not beside him, but near enough to matter. And for the first time in 2 winters, Samuel Alder did not dream of the grave. He dreamed of footsteps arriving instead of leaving. The morning came gray and quiet, snow still falling in soft, exhausted spirals. The land seemed caught between breaths. Samuel rose before first light and set to work, though the barn could wait and the fire was still warm. He didn't know what drove him, only that idleness felt like a betrayal of something unnamed. He found Florence already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in the spare room, lacing up her boots. Her valise was beside her again, neatly buckled. "I'll be on my way," she said, eyes downcast. "Didn't mean to overstay." Samuel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Where would you go?" She hesitated, then shrugged, a motion so slight it was almost imagined. "There's always somewhere. I've made do before." He looked at her then, really looked. The kind of looking a man does when he realizes someone else has learned how to carry her sorrow without letting it show. Her clothes were travel-worn but clean. She had combed her hair and pinned it back tight, like she'd been raised to believe dignity started with neatness. "There's coffee," he said after a moment. "If you want it." That was how she came to stay one more morning. Rosie emerged from her room rubbing her eyes, blinking in confusion at the sight of Florence in the kitchen. But the tension lasted only a minute. Florence smiled, gentle and unassuming, and the girl offered a shy smile in return. When Samuel set 3 plates instead of 2, no one remarked on it. The snow outside kept falling, and the hours passed like a held breath. By noon, Samuel found himself fixing the back gate with Florence beside him, holding nails. She didn't speak unless asked, but moved with quiet purpose. When Rosie wandered into the yard with a rag doll dragging behind her, Florence crouched down and mended a tear in the doll's arm with thread from her pocket. Samuel watched the way she did it, fingers nimble, eyes tender. She did not ask permission. She simply helped. Later, in the soft lull of afternoon, Florence stood at the edge of the porch, watching the trees shift in the wind. Her face was unreadable, like snow covering the tracks of something once wild. He came up beside her, clearing his throat. "How'd you come by that letter?" She didn't look at him at first. Just ran her gloved fingers along the porch railing. "In a paper bundle," she said finally. "Woman at the agency in St. Louis handed it over. Said a man named Alder had written in but never heard back. Thought maybe the reply got lost. She gave it to me, said I seemed the sort who might suit a man like that." Samuel felt the cold in his chest deepen. He hadn't meant for it to go anywhere. That letter had been a moment of weakness, a whisper to the wind. "You thought to come all this way, without hearing from me?" Florence nodded once. "Didn't have much left where I was." He didn't press, but his silence asked. "I worked at a dry goods store," she said softly. "Owner's wife took sick. He asked me to help more. Then he asked for other things." Her voice didn't tremble, but it narrowed. "I said no. Lost the job. Room 2. Weren't many places left to be." He said nothing for a moment, then gestured to the trees. "This place isn't much either." She glanced sideways at him. "It's honest. That's more than most." That night, Florence helped with supper. She peeled potatoes, humming under her breath. Rosie leaned against her, chattering in the simple, winding way of children. Samuel watched from the table, hands idle. Something inside him shifted. Not a blaze, but the barest flicker of warmth, like kindling that hadn't caught yet. After they'd eaten and the dishes were set to dry, Florence asked softly, "Would it be all right if I stayed through the storm?" Samuel nodded. "You can stay as long as you need." She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped, just slightly. That was answer enough. In the days that followed, her presence settled like fresh snow, quiet, natural, covering the sharp edges without asking permission. Samuel was a man who noticed details. He saw how Florence always folded Rosie's blankets with care, how she lit the lamp before dusk without being asked, how she never took the last piece of bread, even if it meant going without. She did not try to replace Miriam. She moved through the house like someone who respected the ghosts but refused to be one. Rosie began calling her Miss Florence, without prompting. Sometimes Samuel caught the girl watching Florence with a look that mixed curiosity and hope, like she was trying to remember something she never quite had. Laughter returned to her voice in small, sudden bursts, like songbirds startled into flight. One morning, as Samuel returned from town with a sack of seed, he found Florence reading aloud to Rosie on the porch. Her voice was soft, lilting, the kind of voice made for stories. The girl was curled at her feet, eyes wide. Florence looked up and met Samuel's gaze with a steadiness that didn't flinch. That night, after Rosie had gone to sleep, Florence lingered by the fire. The silence between them felt different now, not strained, but thick with things unsaid. He poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. "You were married before?" he asked, not unkindly. She shook her head. "Almost. Once." He waited. "He was a teacher. Said he wanted a simple life. Then said I was too plain. Said I'd aged too quick. Left before the banns were posted." Samuel's jaw clenched, but he said only, "He was a fool." She gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe. Or maybe he just wanted something I never was." Samuel looked into the fire, its glow warm on the stone hearth. "Truth is," he said, "I never expected to feel much of anything again." The words surprised them both. He hadn't planned to say them, but they hung in the air now, smoke-thin and honest. Florence didn't respond, but her fingers curled around the cup in her lap, holding it steady. That was enough. The days passed with quiet rhythm. A thaw came, briefly, then more snow. Florence stayed. No one spoke of it, but the house changed shape around her. The silence grew softer. Meals tasted fuller. The space beside the fire felt less empty. One night, Samuel passed by the door to Rosie's room and paused. Inside, Florence sat at the edge of the bed, brushing the girl's hair with gentle strokes. She was singing, something low and sweet, with the cadence of an old prayer. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed. The sound reached somewhere deep. Later, in the kitchen, Florence folded laundry beside him. "I've stayed longer than I meant to," she said. "You're not in the way. I didn't come here to be kept. I came because I thought maybe I could be needed." He looked at her, steady. "You are." The words startled her. She blinked once, then nodded, slow. That night, Samuel found the old letter again. He unfolded it, read it once more. The words felt like something someone else had written, a man drowning, begging the dark for a rope. But now, sitting by the fire, he wasn't drowning. He was waiting. Outside, the snow began again. Light, drifting, soft as breath. Florence sat across the room, darning Rosie's stocking. Her face was calm. Her presence anchored the space around her. Samuel watched her, and thought, maybe a man doesn't always get to choose how mercy arrives. Sometimes it walks through your storm with frostbitten fingers and a name that feels like a prayer. He didn't speak it aloud. Not yet. But the words lived in the quiet between them, warm and waiting. The snow held to the land like it had made a promise it didn't intend to break. March crept in without mercy, and still the frost clung to fence rails, window panes, and every wooden slat of the Alder homestead. The ground was white and crusted, the trees bowed low and bare. But inside the house, the fire didn't flicker out as quickly anymore. It caught stronger, stayed longer. It warmed more than wood and air. It warmed something else, something that hadn't known heat in a long time. Florence had been there nearly 3 weeks. The days had settled into a rhythm that no one spoke of, but all obeyed. She rose early, sometimes earlier than Samuel, and kept to herself during the first hour of the morning, as if letting the house wake on its own. She made breakfast without asking what was needed. She swept the floors before anyone noticed dust. She folded Samuel's shirts with the same precision she used in sewing, pressing creases like care into the cotton. She had no claim on the space she moved through, yet she moved through it like someone who belonged. And that unsettled Samuel more than he could say. He watched her one evening from the woodshed, where he split logs to quiet his mind. Through the window he could see her brushing Rosie's hair, the child leaning into the touch, eyes half closed like a cat in sunlight. Florence wasn't speaking, just humming again, that same soft tune with no words, like memory set to music. He felt it then, sharp and clean, not longing, but the ache of something new stirring inside his chest. And with it, the guilt. Not for wanting her. He hadn't gone that far, not yet, but for knowing that the presence of one woman was beginning to soften the shadow of another. Miriam's face lived in his memory like winter lives in soil, quiet, buried, and necessary. She had been all warmth and firelight, laughter behind closed doors. Her death had hollowed him like a fallen tree. When she passed, he buried not just her body, but the part of himself that could dream. Now here was Florence, neither demanding nor diminishing. She never tried to erase Miriam's presence, nor fill her shoes. She simply moved alongside the ghost, respecting its edges, sharing space in silence. And Rosie, poor motherless girl that she was, had taken to Florence like a flower turning toward the only light it recognized. One night after supper, when the dishes had been done and Rosie was already dreaming beneath her quilts, Florence lingered near the fire. Samuel sat in his chair, boots off, dog at his feet, cup of coffee cooling in his hand. He hadn't spoken much that day, caught in a mood he couldn't name. Florence didn't ask about it. Instead, she pulled the sewing basket into her lap and began patching a tear in one of Rosie's mittens. The lamplight caught her hair, made it shine like worn silk. Samuel watched the way her fingers moved, gentle, deliberate, unhurried. "You always sew like that?" he asked, voice low. She glanced up. "Like what?" "Like you're mending more than fabric." She smiled, faint. Maybe I am. Silence passed between them. Not the cold kind, but the kind that asks to be kept. Samuel shifted, stared at the flames. I don't know what to do with you being here. Florence didn't flinch. You want me gone? No, his voice came out rougher than he meant. That's the trouble. She said nothing. Let the quiet stretch. He swallowed. I don't want to dishonor what I had. But I can't pretend you being here hasn't mattered. Still, Florence didn't rush her reply. She tied off the thread with a small knot, trimmed it clean, then looked up. I never came to replace her, she said gently. I came because I had nowhere left to go. I stayed because kindness like yours is rare. Samuel turned toward her, eyes tired. I don't feel kind. You are, she said. You just forgot how to show it to yourself. It was the sort of truth that sounded simple but took years to earn. He didn't speak again that night, but when he passed her the sugar for her tea, he let his fingers graze hers just a little longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. The days grew longer by minutes. The sun hung later in the sky. The thaw had not come, not fully, but something in the air hinted at change. Then came the visit from Doc Malley. He arrived one afternoon, his buggy dusted with snow, eyes sharp beneath a brim full of ice. He brought medicine for Rosie's cough and a bundle of letters from town. Florence answered the door and offered him coffee before he could even stamp his boots clean. Inside, Samuel greeted the man with a nod and little more. Malley had delivered Rosie, had wept beside Samuel when Miriam passed, had not cried since. As Florence stepped into the kitchen, Doc Malley leaned in, voice low. She's the one, isn't she? The one from the letter. Samuel nodded once. You marrying her? Samuel's jaw clenched. Haven't asked. You planning to? I don't know. Malley studied him. Well, if you don't, someone else will. He said it like a warning. Or a prophecy. That night, after the doctor had gone and Rosie was asleep again, Samuel found Florence folding laundry in the parlor. He stood in the doorway, unsure. Doc said I ought to marry you. Florence didn't pause. That's so. Said if I didn't, someone else would. She finished folding a shirt, placed it in the basket. What do you say? She finally looked at him, eyes steady. I say I won't marry out of pity. Or obligation. I've had enough of that. Samuel stepped closer. It wouldn't be pity. But would it be love? She asked, quiet but firm. He hesitated. I don't know what that feels like anymore. Then don't promise what you can't give. He didn't answer. Just turned and walked out into the yard, where the snow was melting in places, leaving patches of brown earth behind. He chopped wood until the moon rose, until sweat ran down his back and the ache in his shoulders felt cleaner than the ache in his chest. In the days that followed, Florence grew quieter. Not cold, not distant, but withdrawn. Her bag was no longer in the corner of the spare room. It had moved closer to the door. Samuel noticed. One afternoon, while he repaired the wheel on the wagon, Florence came to him with a letter in her hand. She didn't speak at first, just waited until he met her eyes. I wired my cousin in Missouri, she said. She's offered me a place. He stood slowly. You leaving? She nodded. Soon. Rosie, overhearing from the porch, ran down the steps, eyes wide. Why? Florence knelt, touched the child's cheek. Sometimes people don't stay, honey. Sometimes they were only meant to come through long enough to help. The girl burst into tears. Samuel turned away, jaw tight. That night, Florence sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room, hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, but her posture said everything. She had hoped. She had waited. And now she was gathering the pieces of herself before anyone else could. Samuel stood outside her door for a long time, listening to the silence. He didn't know what words might change her mind, or if any should. But he knew this. If she left, something in him would collapse inward again, and he wasn't sure he'd come back from it this time. He didn't knock. He didn't go in. But he stayed there, all the same, until the fire in the hearth burned low. The next morning, Samuel rose before dawn, hitched the wagon, and rode into town. The roads were still slick, the wind sharp. But he drove with purpose, coat buttoned tight, hat pulled low. He went first to the mercantile, then the smithy, then finally to the small chapel at the far end of town. When he returned, his eyes were red from the wind, or maybe from something else. He found Florence in the kitchen, coat on, bag by the door. "You leaving now?" he asked. She turned, expression unreadable. "Figured it best. I went to town," he said, setting a small box on the table. She didn't touch it, just looked at him. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I'm not good with feelings. But I know this. You showed up when I didn't think anything good ever would again. You mended more than clothes. You mended this place. You mended me." She said nothing, tears trembling on her lashes. "I don't want to ask you to stay because I'm lonely," he said. "I want to ask because I finally see what's been standing in front of me. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what we might have had if I'd spoken." She opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, plain but polished. "You sure?" she whispered. "I've never been more." She stood there a long time, then set her bag down gently on the floor. "I'm not perfect," she said. "Neither am I. I scare easy. I'll wait. I need more than shelter, Samuel. I'll give what I can, every day." She stepped forward and placed her hand in his. Outside, the wind shifted. Not warmer yet, but different. Inside, the fire didn't just warm the room, it lit the corners of a new beginning. The stars were still awake when Samuel Alder stirred, long before the rooster crowed or the stove's fire began to hum. The world beyond the frost-laced window was a hush of midnight blue and silver. He lay still for a moment, listening. The weight beside him had not shifted. Florence had not come back. Not yet. Her door had stayed closed since their conversation the evening before. He had offered his heart in the plain-spoken language he knew, and she had stayed, but silence had taken her hand afterward. Not rejection, not acceptance, just quiet. He rose slowly, each movement deliberate. He dressed in the dark, boots pulled on, collar turned up. The house was still. Rosie slept down the hall with her arm around the doll Florence had stitched. The child had smiled in her sleep last night, soft and unguarded. Samuel had not seen that in many long moons. Outside, the cold bit like a blade, but he welcomed it. It made the blood move. He saddled the mare and rode out while the dark still owned the land. His breath ghosted in the air as he made the ride into town, each hoofbeat a pulse against the snow-packed earth. It wasn't until the faintest brush of lavender touched the sky that he knocked on the parson's door. The Reverend blinked at him from the stoop, face pale from sleep. "I need a ceremony," Samuel said simply. "Before the sun rises." The Reverend rubbed at his jaw, tried to read his face. "Anyone else know about this?" Samuel shook his head. "Not yet." He paused. "Does she?" "She will." The Reverend studied him, then nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." By the time Samuel returned home, the sky had shifted from night's velvet to morning's hush. The world was tinted in pale colors, all breath and waiting. He tethered the mare and stepped inside, the warmth of the house rising to meet him like a sigh. Florence was in the kitchen, dressed, hair braided down her back. She turned at the sound of the door, eyes searching his. "You were gone. I had something to tend." She waited, patient but alert. "I asked the Reverend to marry us," he said, voice steady. Florence blinked, but she didn't draw back. Her hands folded at her waist. "Now." He nodded. "Before the sun climbs too high." She looked down, took in the plain blue dress she wore, the apron still around her waist. "I'm not ready for something like that, Samuel. I haven't even." "It's not about readiness," he said softly. "It's about truth. And this is mine. You've already stitched yourself into this home. You've already found a place in my daughter's heart. In mine too, if I'm honest. She swallowed, throat tight. I know you're scared, he continued. I am too. But I also know what it feels like to lose everything and still wake up needing something to hold on to. Something that stays. She looked away, jaw trembling. It feels like I've had to beg to be wanted most of my life. I ain't asking you to beg. He stepped closer. I'm asking if you'll let yourself be chosen. The silence between them was heavy, but not cold. Rosie's soft footsteps sounded down the hall. She appeared in her nightdress, rubbing her eyes. Mama, Florence. Florence froze. Rosie didn't correct herself. Didn't even seem to realize what she'd said. She simply reached out and took Florence's hand. Florence's breath caught. Her eyes met Samuel's, and something unspoken passed between them, something that neither winter nor time could erode. She nodded. He left the room only to fetch his late wife's shawl, thick wool and lace-edged, kept wrapped in cedar. He held it out, quiet. Florence took it reverently and wrapped it around her shoulders. No veil, no gown. But there was meaning in the warmth of something once sacred, repurposed with tenderness. Rosie wore her boots over wool stockings and rode between them on the mare. The three of them moved like shadows through the still sleeping town, their breath rising in the cold like smoke from prayer candles. The chapel stood small and waiting, its windows dark. The Reverend met them with a lantern and a tired but kind smile. No witnesses. No bells. Just the creak of old pews and the hush of mourning. Florence stood beside Samuel in the tiny aisle, hands clasped, eyes lifted but unsure. The Reverend's words were few and full. There was no poetry, only truth. Do you come here by your own will? Yes. Do you promise to walk beside each other, not ahead, not behind? Yes. Do you vow to give not what is perfect, but what is real? Yes. Samuel spoke only when needed. Florence, the same. But when he looked at her and said, I choose you, because you saw me when I forgot I was worth seeing, her eyes filled, and she nodded through the tears. The Reverend gave a small blessing. And that was that. No ring. No bouquet. Just three people walking out into the first gold light of day. The sky was lavender above them. The town still slept. And no one knew yet what had taken place. It belonged to them alone. In the wagon ride back, Rosie fell asleep on Florence's lap, tiny hand curled in the folds of her shawl. Samuel drove in silence, watching the woman beside him with new eyes. He had married her not because he needed help with Rosie, nor because he feared being alone. He had married her because in her silence there was strength, and in her eyes there was a mirror, one that didn't judge his grief, but honored it. The house met them with a quiet that felt different now. Not the hollow kind. The sacred kind. Inside, Samuel hung up his coat and made a small breakfast. Florence sat by the fire, hair unbraided now, Rosie still curled against her like a limb she'd grown without realizing. When he brought her a cup of tea, she took it without a word, and their hands brushed. No spark, no jolt. Just warmth. The day passed like a breath. No grand announcement. No sudden change. Yet everything was different. That afternoon, Samuel found her sitting on the porch, shelling beans. She looked up as he approached. Was it foolish, she asked quietly, to marry before we knew what would come? He shook his head. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is believe in what's growing before you see the fruit. She smiled at that. A small one, but it stayed. That night, Florence tucked Rosie in and stayed beside her until the girl's breathing evened. Samuel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. She called you Mama. Florence turned. I heard. How did it feel? Like something I don't deserve, she said. But something I want to protect all the same. He stepped into the room, rested a hand on her back. We'll earn it. All of us. Later, when the lamps were low and the fire casting shadows across the walls, Samuel poured 2 cups of tea and handed her one. She took it, but didn't sip. I meant it, he said. When I told you this place needed you. She nodded. And I meant it when I stayed. They sat in silence after that, letting the fire speak. And in that silence, the snow outside finally stopped falling. The sky beyond the window cleared. Stars blinked down on them, ancient and indifferent. But inside, beneath those stars, a small home glowed with something gentle and just beginning. Neither of them knew what the days ahead would bring. But they knew this: before the sun rose that day, they had chosen one another. Not with fireworks. Not with declarations. With quiet. With steadiness. And with hope. Spring didn't announce itself in Bristle Creek with any kind of ceremony. It just softened the mornings little by little. Snow retreated without apology. Ice melted off the eaves and dripped like small metronomes onto the porch rail. What had been brittle and white became slush, then soil, then the pale blush of budding green. The wind changed, too, lost its teeth, started to sing again. Inside the alder house, the rhythm had grown gentle and sure. Florence moved through the rooms like she'd always belonged there. Rosie followed her like a shadow, asking endless questions and giving soft, solemn hugs when answers didn't come quickly enough. Samuel mended fences and dug furrows into earth he hadn't believed in before. He came in at noon with dirt on his hands and something lighter in his chest. The silence that had once choked the place had become a balm, full of comfort instead of absence. They were not loud with each other. There were no grand shows of affection. But every gesture meant something. Samuel would reach for Florence's shawl when the wind picked up. Florence would lay his gloves by the stove, warming them before he returned. Rosie began to hum Florence's lullabies, never asking whose they'd been first. Love had woven itself into their days not like lightning but like roots, slow, unseen, inevitable. Then came the man from the past. It was a Tuesday when he rode in, the kind of gray-skied day that made the sun feel like a distant idea. His name was Eli Graves, and he wore it like a brand. Tall, lean, dressed fine for frontier standards. His boots were polished, his coat without wear. But his eyes moved like someone who didn't trust the road beneath him. He showed up at the mercantile first, asking quiet questions. Then he showed up at the alder place. Florence was on the porch, stringing beans with Rosie when she looked up and saw him. Her face didn't twist in surprise or fear, just tightened slightly, like a door pulled gently closed. Samuel stepped out of the barn and watched the man dismount. "Eli," Florence said, voice flat. "I wondered if you were still breathing." He gave her a small smile. "Didn't expect to find you all the way out here. I didn't leave a map." His gaze flicked to Samuel, then back. "I came to talk." "I've no interest in that." Eli glanced at the child sitting wide-eyed beside Florence. "You have a daughter now?" "She's mine," Florence said, her voice sharper now. "She's been mine since the day she wrapped her arms around my neck and didn't ask what I'd done wrong to be alone." Rosie stood and reached for Florence's hand. Florence squeezed it, eyes never leaving Eli. "I made mistakes," he said after a long moment. "You were right to be angry. But time changes a man." "It didn't change your timing," she said. "You always come when I'm just about all right again." Eli looked at the house, at the fields, at Samuel. "You married him?" "Yes," she answered. He paused. "You deserve better." "I have better." Samuel hadn't spoken yet, but he stepped forward now, slow and solid. Not confrontational. Not afraid. Just there. "You've said what you came to say," he told the man. Eli narrowed his eyes. "She deserves a man with fire in his blood. Not one who builds walls around grief." Samuel didn't flinch. "She doesn't need fire. She needs steadiness. And peace." Florence spoke then, soft but sure. "Eli, you didn't come to win me back. You came to see if I was still breakable. I'm not." He looked at her like he almost didn't recognize her. And maybe he didn't. Maybe the Florence he had known was a girl who bent toward whatever kindness wouldn't disappear. But the woman before him now didn't bend. She stood rooted. He mounted his horse and left without another word. When the dust settled, Samuel turned to Florence. "You all right?" She nodded, slow. "Yes. More than I expected to be." He looked down at Rosie, who clutched Florence's skirt with big, worried eyes. Florence bent and scooped the child into her arms. "Mama's not going anywhere," she whispered. That night, after the supper plates had been cleaned and Rosie tucked beneath her patchwork quilt, Florence stood at the window, watching the moon rise. The room behind her was dim, lit only by the hearth's glow. Samuel entered quietly, his steps familiar now, his presence a comfort rather than a question. "He always had a way of finding cracks," she said without turning. Samuel joined her, looked out at the moonlit yard. "He won't find any now." "I used to think I needed someone to chase me," Florence said, "to make me feel worth the effort." Samuel's brow furrowed. "But you," she continued, "you walk beside me even when I say nothing, even when I fall quiet. That's love, isn't it? Not the rush, but the return." He nodded. "I never knew how to speak it, but I think I live it now." She turned to face him. "I married you before dawn because I was afraid you'd leave," he admitted. "Because I'd lived so long with loss, I didn't know how to hold something without fearing it'd slip through." Florence stepped forward, rested a hand against his chest. "And I stayed because you never asked me to be anything but who I was." He leaned into her touch, closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the walls he'd built inside himself felt like they were dissolving. "I was a broken man," he whispered. "You were grieving," she replied. "And grief doesn't make you less. It makes you deeper." He opened his eyes, looked into hers. "You believe that?" "I live it." In the quiet that followed, something unspoken passed between them, something vast and tender. They kissed, not like strangers fumbling toward passion, but like two people who had already built a life with their hands and were now learning to rest in the safety of it. Spring came hard and full after that. Rain turned the fields rich. Birds returned to the trees. Rosie grew like the wildflowers, small and bright and stubborn. She called Florence Mama, without thinking now. Samuel watched them from the porch some days, heart swelling in ways he no longer feared. The townsfolk began to notice the change. Doc Malley would tip his hat and mutter something about miracles. Mrs. Tate, once all suspicion, now brought preserves and spoke with gentle awe. Even the mailman lingered longer at the gate, asking after Rosie's favorite stories. But none of that mattered more than the way Florence laughed now, freely from the belly. Or the way Samuel reached for her hand without checking first. Or how, on rainy mornings, they would sit together at the table with coffee and speak about nothing and everything. Then, one night, the storm came. A true spring tempest, lightning like split bones across the sky, thunder that shook the glass. Rosie whimpered in her sleep, and Florence rose to soothe her. Samuel lit the oil lamp, checked the windows, and found Florence already standing by the girl's bedside, one hand stroking her brow, the other steady on her shoulder. He watched them for a long time. The storm howled, but inside it was calm. When Florence joined him again, she curled beside him on the worn settee, head on his shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "I think I was waiting my whole life to stop waiting." He brushed a thumb over her knuckles. "You were always meant to be found." The storm passed before dawn. The fields shimmered with new water. The sky cracked open into gold and blue. That morning, Florence walked outside and stood barefoot in the mud, eyes closed, face lifted. Rosie ran around her in circles, chasing butterflies that hadn't been there yesterday. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, smiling like a man who finally believed in the future. As Florence turned toward him, muddy dress clinging to her ankles, he opened his arms. She went to him without hesitation. And in that moment, the world was not loud or fast. It was soft and full. A quiet kind of love, steady as heartbeat. Earned, not given. Built, not begged. For all the years they had wandered, her through rejection, him through grief, they had found something better than rescue. They had found each other. And the sun rose on a day that would never again belong to silence.